believers, welcome back to the show. If you're new to this podcast, then it's one where we speak to a whole range of folk from creative backgrounds who tell us what they do, how they do it, and we also still have a bit of time for some high-octane chat about the most influential TV show ever made, which according to me and lots of other folk is The X-Files. If you are new, by the way, do drop me a line. Let me know how you came to the podcast. Was it from the clips I've been posting on TikTok? Probably not. Taking me ages to edit those together as well. But keeps me out of trouble. I should say I'm trying to keep to a respectful volume because I'm at a funeral. Who's passed away, you might ask? Well, the year 2024, that's who. Gone before their time. Can't say I'm too cut up about seeing the back of them, but thought I'd gather to show my respects regardless. How's it been for you? Have you been away? What have you been up to in the interim period? I've been to Corfu. Ate a lot of moussaka. Met a dog who we called James. Tried to see the sights of the island, most notably where they shot the Bond film For Your Eyes Only. Not a blue plaque in sight though. Criminal. Lots of great chats coming up for the second half of season 2 of the podcast. Illustrators, journalists, magicians, voiceover artists, drummers, art writers, TV writers, clowns, the lot. And they're all here to offer their insights into their lives and their work and to delve deeper into the mysteries of The X-Files. And kicking off that second season is a ghoulish chat with the writer and film critic Kat Hughes. Kat covers genre cinema for a range of publications. She's on the board of Fright Fest and also part of the Online Association of Female Film Critics. In the conversation we talk about changing trends in horror cinema, genre, in inverted commas, filmmakers' obsession with the 80s, the rise of influencers and whether that's a good thing or not, being introduced to scary material at a young age, and of course we get to speaking about X-Files Season 2 Episode 13. In the episode, Mulder and Scully investigate a fetishist obsessed with death who's on the rampage, while Scully is still recovering from a number of traumatic episodes in her past. As always, if you like our show, please do leave me a message, subscribe, review, follow us on X, Instagram, YouTube, Threads, now TikTok, if you're around. But without further ado, welcome to our nightmare. Here's Kat.
I'm good. I'm busy, which is, it's a double-edged sword. It's always nice to be busy, but then, busy means tired.
Yeah.
At time of recording, I've just done a weekend at Celluloid Screams.
Wow.
So I'm in that kind of like immediate post-festival slump where like you've not really eaten and you've not really slept, but you had a good time, so it was fine.
Wow. It's do you know what? I lived in Sheffield for many years. I never ended up. Maybe I did go and see something, but what's it like? And have you done that festival before in the past?
So this is my third year in person. I think I did like one of the COVID years, like the one where like people could go, but they had to leave like 3 seats between each other, sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
I did that virtually, and I think it's because it was a long shot, but they had Titan that year, and I was like,
Right.
Can I get a screener?
Right.
No, I couldn't get a screener. But that kind of put it on my radar. And then some friends have been going kind of since day dot, and they recommended that I turn up. And I'd recently been asked to go onto the Fright Fest board, which is, it's just like a sounding board for the festival guys to make sure that they're on the kind of the right track. And I was kind of thinking, well, the only one I've really done in person is Fright Fest, so I feel like I need to broaden my horizons to see what else and like how other festivals work in comparison. So I kind of went the first year for that, and I had a lot of fun. It's a lot more chilled out than Fright Fest. It's just one screen,
Yeah.
so everybody's seeing the same films at the same time. It's in the showroom, which has obviously got like the bar slash cafe restaurant attached to it, so
Mm.
you don't have to go foraging for food. And yeah, it's just quite nice and chill. And until the karaoke party on the Sunday night, and then you finish at 3, and then you finish saying goodbye to everybody at 4,
Yeah.
and then you get home at like 5 for some reason, and then you have to get up to come back home. But yeah, it's a nice little festival. They actually announced that they're going to be doing a second one a year
Oh,
now,
right.
which isn't going to be, yeah, it's not going to be as focused on horror as their October one is.
Mm.
It's going to be in April, and it's kind of going to be the films that they saw but couldn't quite justify fitting into a more horror led strand. So it's going to be like
Oh,
sci-fi
great.
and action and martial arts, and it's going to be called Culture Shock. I think that's what Rob said. Rob said at the event.
Nice.
So yeah, so come April they'll now be doing 2 festivals there, which will be quite interesting to see.
Great. Some more like the kind of WTF sort of weird and wonderful things they've kind of come across on the travels. That sounds great.
Yeah, because I think obviously like with Fright Fest, they have like 70 feature films. They can have a load of sci-fi and a load of action thrillers and stuff. But when your program is closer to 20 films, I think
Yeah.
people feel a bit cheated when they've come to a horror fest and half of it wasn't horror. So this is their way to champion these films that they really, really liked, but knew that they couldn't feature without causing trouble.
Yeah. What's your karaoke tune of choice?
It depends who I'm singing with because I don't go alone. No, like so me and my group of friends, we do like karaoke like once a year, just like between like 10 of us,
Yeah.
and like then I'll go on my own because it's 10 people. I know them all really well. But in a festival setting, there are 2 friends and we always do a Meatloaf song together.
Yes.
Um, we did Bon Jovi this year at Fright Fest. We did
Wonderful.
Always. And then, yeah, at Sal this weekend, me and another friend, she was like, "Shall we do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay," hoping that they were already at capacity because it's quite late in the
Yeah.
evening. And she's like, "What shall we do?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, like surprise me." And she did surprise me because she picked a song called "Dead Girl Walking" from the Heathers musical.
What
Uh,
a deep cut.
which, yes, which we have sung like in our normal like karaoke group before,
Right.
but not in front of like 100 other people. And she was suspiciously quiet on her side of the singing. So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to do a deep cut from the Heathers musical soundtrack, then that is the place to do
exactly.
it. And what did you get a chance to see? What did you pack everything in? Did you cram everything in? And what did you like from the program?
So I was quite lucky because I covered all genre content as much as I can from festivals from like Sundance down. I'd seen quite a few of the films before, so
Mm.
there wasn't that pressure to have to watch everything, or at least I've not got to sit there making notes during everything. So I think there was only 3 or 4 new films that I saw there, but I did do some repeat watches. So there was Frankie Frico was the opening film, which is the new one from special effects writer director Steve Konstansky,
Right.
who did Manborg and
Oh,
Psycho
yeah,
Gorman.
Psycho Gorman. Great. Great.
The inspiration is Ghoulies Go to College, which the festival also played at Steve's request. And it's like a schlocky 80s comedy where there's this guy called Connor, played by Connor Sweeney, who's part of the Astron Six clan,
Yeah.
who is a big square, and his wife goes away for the weekend and she's been like taunting him about that. He's always so square. And then he sees a late night party line ad for Frankie Frico, and call Frankie Frico for a good time. And it's very much filmed, they're shot in like the sort of like sex chats like adverts that used to be on late night TV, but it's
Right.
like for this Frankie Frico, and he calls the number and then finds himself at the beck and call of interdimensional goblin creatures,
Great.
where like One of them, Frankie, is kind of like a Fonz-esque rocker slacker type, and then there's like a cyborg one who like is like the tech support, and then there's a cowgirl as well. All puppets, all painstakingly like brought to
Great.
life. Like 80 minutes, so it's not too long. So that one was fun. And then I'm trying to think. Another one would be The Last Video Store, which technically screened at Fright Fest Halloween last year, but is coming to Arrow Blu-ray in December.
All right.
And that again is by another Canadian team. It stars this guy called Kevin, who in real life runs a video store in Alberta, Canada.
Right.
And they kind of started doing like a load of shorts together set in his video store, and then it's kind of over the last 10 years has morphed into a feature. So it's this woman goes to return the late rentals of her father and finds herself being talked at by this video nerd about like all of these films,
Right.
and then she has the Videonomicon in her possession,
Right.
which Kevin wants to play, and it ends up bringing forth beings from some of the other films within his catalogue into the store. So there's kind of like a Jason Voorhees character, and there's like a
Right.
Predator style alien, and then there's like a cheap Jean-Claude Van Damme ripoff, and this young woman and the video store clerk have to like put those things back where they came from. And it's very love letter to video stores and,
Yeah.
browsing the aisles, and lots of 80s neon and synthwave music. So that one was, again, playing for laughs.
It also sounds like it's come from a sort of, like you can imagine, it's almost like a regional film, that, and I love that all these
Yeah.
regional titles are getting unearthed, something that would never see the light of the day, that got made by, people for like 10 quid in the middle of nowhere. Do you find it irritating being seen as the genre? I mean, do you feel like you're seen as the genre person by the outlets you write for? Do you mind that? Do you like it? And if so, is there anything within the genre that you think you kind of avoid at all, or that you naturally gravitate to?
I mean, I don't mind being sort of like the voice of genre for places. I think we've come a long way with women being able to write about horror in recent years. So I think the kind of the landscape has got a little bit more populated, but it's kind of nice to be amongst those voices doing it. In terms of what I'll watch, like when I cover Fright Fest, I will cover all 70 films, so I will
Yeah.
watch anything that they are screening. If it's left to me, like my personal preferences outside of like something that I'm working on, I'm not necessarily a fan of the extreme horror. Like I've seen stuff like Martyrs and The Sadness and whatever, and they're all fine. But I'm talking like like
Guinea pig
August
stuff.
Undergrounds and the guinea pig
Yeah.
things like they're not for me. And I guess in terms of favorites, I love a teen horror.
Yeah.
I mean, I love a teen TV show. I want to relive my youth, so I will happily watch a teen horror. Slashers are always fun because they tend to not require too much brain power. But then on the flip of that, I also love like a really dark psychological thriller, like something like Daniel Isn't Real, that's like
Yeah.
really sort of mind twisty. So yeah, I'll give anything a shot. But I would also say that as much as I do predominantly write about horror, technically horror's not my first love. Like I kind of got in, I guess, through sci-fi horror.
Yeah.
So like Aliens was a big early film for me, and then The Terminator and Terminator 2 were big ones. So equally sci-fi action is where my heart lies as well. So I'm trying to sort of like make people aware of that as well, so that I don't just get shoehorned into this kind of like horror female. and particularly with how crowded it is, because there's now a lot of women writing about horror. There's not necessarily that many writing about like action cinema, so I think it's
Yeah,
slowly starting to kind of broaden a little bit.
I feel like people are even more sniffy about sci-fi than they are about horror. You know, I don't know, but you notice on your travels, are you noticing like waves and trends and things that people tend to gravitate to at any one time? You know, is there a trend this year? Has there been a trend in the past, or is it just what it always seems to be like to me? There's always someone making an '80s retro slasher film. Brilliant.
We still are on this nostalgia train for
Mm.
the 80s, and I think that's purely because the filmmakers who are making their films are those who were coming of age sort of during the 80s. I know in the example of, well, both Steve Konstansky and the team behind the Last Video Store, they're all kind of late 30s and you grew up watching a load of VHSs.
Yeah.
So that's definitely inspired them. In terms of sort of mainstream, obviously earlier this year we had the double whammy, like a week apart, of Immaculate and The First Omen. So I
Yes.
think nuns are back in horror, and I just think maybe more independent horror is getting its time to shine, whatever its focus is. So, like Longlegs was a reasonably modest budget despite having Nicolas Cage, and that obviously took social media by storm because of
Mm.
some excellent marketing by the team there. And then you've got Strange Darling, which is kind of more horror adjacent, but does have some of those elements, which again, I think mainly due to the cast and crew pushing it, has really made its way out. And then most recently, you've got Terrifier 3,
Yeah.
which going from like Art's first appearance in All Hallows Eve and Terrifier, nobody could have imagined that now it would have, I think it's Signature Entertainment's highest grossing film ever. And it's
Wow.
currently,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, it's taken. I think they've taken about 2 million with it now or something at time of recording, which it's only been out a couple of weeks, and that's the UK box office, and it's an 18 certificate film. And then uh, it's currently got 50 million worldwide, which makes it the highest grossing unrated movie, because in the US it's unrated.
Isn't that incredible? I guess it's. I mean, it's sad that maybe studio heads are going, oh, we should probably make some more of that. It has to kind of boil down to figures at the end of the day, and if it's if it's not making money at the box office, then the top studio heads aren't interested in it. But I've not had a chance to see Terrifier 3 yet, but I really enjoyed the other two.
Yeah, I wasn't as sold on the first one.
Mm.
Second one I preferred, but the third one I really got on board with, because I think it's found its balance between the tones of the first and the second one, and then it's through Christmas in. And I read
Yeah.
a letterboxd review which described Art the Clown as Mr. Bean if you had a breakdown, and since then that's kind of, so suddenly a switch has gone on, and now I understand that character. Now that I understand that, like, that's kind of the vibe, and I've sort of read some interviews where David Howard Thornton has said that Mr. Bean is a big inspiration for the character. So
Really?
watching,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So watching three through the veil of this is just Mr. Bean if he was having a really bad day, that humor then clicks in a little bit more.
That's nice. You talked about Aliens there. When did you first see that? It sounds like a majorly formative experience for you, but how were you watching films growing up? Was it mostly on VHS or DVD, or were you sneaking in to see stuff at the theatre?
Well, I was a child of the 80s, and I had a young single mum who didn't really know the rules. So I would wander in, like, if I couldn't sleep, and she'd be watching like Ghoulies or Gremlins or whatever, like Dolls, from Stuart Gordon,
Yeah.
and she'd like me sort of like sit and watch until maybe there was something that happened that she deemed was like, oh no, maybe you shouldn't watch this, and then she'd take me back to bed. So I saw. I mean, I must have been like three or four at this point in time. And then Gremlins 1 really scared me, and then I watched the second one and fell in love with the second one to the point of I watched it every single day when I was in infant school,
Right.
and I would have a tantrum if they wouldn't let me watch it, because I needed to see Gremlins 2. So Gremlins 2 was a big one. Labyrinth
Yes.
was another big one, and then I came to Terminator. I think I did Terminator 2 first,
Hmm.
and I would have been seven-ish. And then I went into Terminator after that. And then I watched Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3 when I was 7/8.
Wow,
And I
right.
did, so I remember I did them Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. And, this is long enough ago that Resurrection wasn't even a rumor.
Yeah.
So I was terrified by Alien, fell in love with Aliens, and then had my heart broken in Alien 3 when Ripley died because I didn't know she was going to come back.
Right.
We did the cinema. I think I saw Jurassic Park like 2 or 3 times in the cinema upon
Yeah.
release.
It's kind of interesting that a lot of those, like you were saying about action cinema as well, and certainly Jurassic Park, I guess all of them really, Terminator 2, you could describe them all as horror adjacent. They're like thrillers, but I watched, we went on a plane on holiday recently and took our 8-year-old, and he'd seen the later Jurassic Park films, but he'd not seen number one. I was like, I'll put that on, so he can watch it on the iPad on the plane. And I'd forgot how like horror it is, and he was like really dumbfounded by Nedry getting ripped apart. I mean, the thing is brilliant Spielberg stuff. You never really seen much of it, but that stuff with Nedry and the hands falling on Laura Dern's shoulder and all these like horrific images that you think you look back and you go, oh, that's a horror film, yeah. So he was like, I think he's
Yeah.
deeply scarred by that. But and I think to your point, something like Strange Darling as well. It's like the sort of tropes and the language of horror is now, I like it, as sort of seeping in back into more mainstream cinema a bit, which is always nice to see.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, Jurassic Park. I had read, I was a advanced reader when I was a kid, so I didn't have the kids novelization of Jurassic Park. I was handed the Michael Crichton
Yeah,
version,
right.
which I read. I read before going to see Jurassic Park for the first time. So I was expecting something much more intense because the book, like the whole Nedry thing, like the Dilophosaur is much bigger and it disembowels him, and so I was prepared for something really grotesque and didn't get that. So
Yeah, and the old man gets it in the book as well, doesn't he? From what I remember, gets eaten by the
yes,
little
yeah,
copies, what they're called.
yeah. Yeah, which they then brought into the Lost World film with Peter Stormare's character getting eaten by them.
How difficult is it for you to get your writing out there and to, say, make ends meet as a writer? But is it? It seems from the writers I speak to, incredibly difficult.
I mean, it's definitely difficult. I started this when I was working in retail as a creative outlet. Um, so I primarily work for, I say work, I primarily write for the Hollywood News, but there's no money in that.
Yeah,
It's the website doesn't make enough to sustain the editor, let alone
yeah,
anybody else. Like he has a side hustle as a wedding photographer and videographer.
right.
So, he's kind of doing that to keep the site going. So when I started, it was just a hobby. It was something to do outside of retail, and it gave me opportunities to see films early and to talk to like some people in the industry that I really admired and respected.
Mm,
And then I kind of kept it as a hobby as I moved into, I worked at Lionsgate for a time and Entertainment One at a time in the tech teams. And then I had my daughter and had no choice but to start looking at trying to make some money from writing because just jobs aren't easy to work around a kid
yeah,
unless you have a lot of money for childcare or you have a grandparent and nearby, and we were the idiots that moved like 200 miles away from either grandparent unit, so
yeah. Okay,
we are
yeah.
we are kind of beholden. But it's, yeah, I think it all depends on how you want to approach it. Like, I know people who do like a lot of news shifts and things, but that's not where I feel that my strengths lie. I'm more reviewing and essays and interviewing, and that's tougher to get breaks. But there are inroads. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to do some stuff from Second Sight
Yeah.
and a couple of bits with Arrow, and it's all, like the cliche of, building, networking, and building your brand and building your name. So recently I have been lucky to be quite busy with commissions, and I've recently started to moderate some Q&As and gala screenings and things. So that's another direction that I'd like to move out in. But
Mm.
yeah, it's a lot about who knows you and how you're perceived. So I feel like it's important that, I think with any job, just remembering social media. I think so many people forget that people look at social media
Right.
when it comes to hiring. And I think it's important not to be somebody, especially if you want to do about film writing, to not be one of those people that's always dumping on something. If
Yeah.
you're like, oh, this film was rubbish, and then they're consistently like providing tweets that then reinforce that their opinion was right. And it's just, I don't know, that to me, as an editor, I wouldn't be wanting to hire that person because there's that perception that they're just negative. I'd rather
Yeah.
have somebody that I thought was going to be a bit more fair watching a film.
I see a lot of grumbling on social media. Maybe not so much about the films, more about, if people have had a bad experience at a film festival, or had a bad experience with a film distributor. I often think, you could just pick up the phone to that festival, or you could just pick up the phone to that distributor and have a conversation with them, rather than immediately hitting social media. Because I imagine if you were a distributor in a film festival looking at that, you go, well, maybe we won't work with that person again. But
What
yeah.
exactly? Yeah. It's like, I think it was like Fantastic Fest recently. There was, when their press tickets went online, there was some issue, and there was several journalists covering it who were just like, "Oh, I'm going to travel. I've traveled all this way, and now I'm not going to be able to see anything. How is that fair?" And just like moan, moan, moan. It's like, well, how is that going to get you into the good graces of the people running the festival? Why is that going to make them want to help you when you do arrive at the festival? I get, it's disappointing or it's frustrating, but that's what like chats with friends are for.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what,
yeah.
that's what that WhatsApp group with fellow writers or whatever is. That, you go and you moan in there. You don't do it on social media, because that could come back to bite you.
I don't know. You probably know more than me whether I don't know if you experienced any difficulty getting involved in junkets or anything like that, but it does seem to be, because I'm based in Edinburgh, so I kind of have a bit of like a sort of keep a toe in what's going on in London, but it does seem to be a kind of rise of influencers are just taking up all these junket spots now, and you very rarely see a film journalist in there asking, non-sanctioned questions. Do you do much of that side of things, and do you find it difficult to get into?
It does become frustrating sometimes, because even within the same distributor or the same PR company, they'll get in touch with you about one sort of film, but then they won't get in touch with you with another. Or
Mm.
you will ask about a screening or a junket, and you'll be told, oh no, we haven't sorted that yet. But then you'll talk to your mate the next day, and they're going to a screening or in a junket the next
Right,
day
right.
for that thing. And I mean, I am one of those people that you can tell me no, that's fine. People who, like, it's like when you're like pitching for a commission, if that idea is not for that person, that's fine. If they let me know, if they can let me know that, that's amazing. But
Yeah.
what tends to happen is it's a no, and then they just ghost you, which then, that's when I start to get frustrated and sort of start to like resent that outlet in a way, because you can tell me no, I'm not going to take it to heart. And it's a similar way with, if there's not a junket opportunity because my outlet doesn't fit, or there's not enough space, or I've spoken to that person before or whatever, just tell me that. Don't be like, oh
Yeah.
well, we'll get back to you, because they're inevitably not. And yeah, it can be tricky to get on, and it's staying on everybody's lists, and people are always, teams are always changing around, and it can be a nightmare. So I don't do as many junkets as I would like to, but that's not necessarily not for want of trying.
Yeah. Where are you based now then, Kat? You said you were in London, but you moved out, have you?
So we are like Essex, so
Right.
we are about an hour from door to door, depending on like timings of like trains and tubes. So we're like 10 minutes on a train to zone 6.
Right.
So we're not too far. I mean, another slight irritation is that since the pandemic, all of the press screenings, which historically were 6 for 6:30, have started to become 6:15 for 7, 7
Right.
for 7:30, and that makes it trickier for anybody, even like so, who's only an hour out of London, because you inevitably have engineering works in the evening, and it's like films are getting longer, so it'll start at 7:30, but then it might finish at 10,
Yeah.
and then you've got to get back, and then it's like 11, 11:30, and so yeah, that's something that I've noticed has changed since the pandemic.
What's the reasoning
Is
behind that then for starting later?
I feel it's because another thing that has changed is I know that when I used to work at Lionsgate, as my responsibility in the tech team was, I would be one of the people who would have to test the screens before premieres and press screenings. So we'd have to check the DCP to make sure that it had the right film on, that there wasn't any problems, and then we'd have to check a backup print as well, which would be playing in parallel, so that on the night, if the first film went down, there'd be like a 10-second delay, and then the second print would kick in. And there was a lot of influencer only screenings, and then press screenings slash multimedias where you'd have like other people from the industry. Now it just seems that it's just a multimedia, and everybody's thrown into the mix. So influencers are now attending what historically would be for press and exhibitions and just other distributors. So there's less seats, which then means that more people end up disappointed. But because they've got the influencers there, they need to do the stuff that they used to do at the influencer only events, which would be they'd have like a photo op, they'd have a nice bag of swag,
Right.
a Q&A. So a lot of these ones, especially like, in your big Leicester Square sites, now have like photo ops and everything available during that time. And it's like we're all being made to wait for later, so that these influencers can turn up and get their content, which is great that that's what they're doing to get word out about the film. But most press just want to go home, because
Yeah.
they've maybe done a couple of junkets in the day, or they've been working another job at 9 to 5, and they've had to travel in, and now they've got to wait around, and they're not going to get back until late. It's one of the, I get it, it must be a money thing. Obviously, film was in crisis, particularly during the pandemic, and this is a way to save costs. Why have two screenings when you can have one? But there is this big, I think, culture divide between press and influencers. And I know there's always a lot of moaning about influencers not necessarily wanting to actually see the films. They just kind of want to come and do the bit before.
Yeah.
And then during the films, they're a lot more likely to be the ones pulling their phones out, which is obviously bad cinema etiquette.
Yeah, that's irritating, isn't it? It's really irritating, and I don't know. How do you feel about the future of film journalism? Because obviously we just had Total Film coming to an end. I feel like there's a lot of doom and gloom on film Twitter, at least, about film writing. Do you feel that, or do you feel like there'll be like a third way?
So, I mean, I've got a friend who, is adamant that people just don't want to read anymore. I mean, I know I've had it before where I've shared a link to a review, and then somebody just commented, "What did you think?" And it's like, well, click the link and read the review.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that's the entire reason why I have just made this post. So I think there is potentially something to that. TikTok's obviously one of the the most prominent social medias now, and that is just, it's watching, that's watching videos. The YouTube reviewers are getting the thing. I mean, it's sad as somebody that grew up collecting Total Film, that Total Film I know more. I mean, it's been a little while since I've read an Empire, but I feel that they've expanded a lot more out into TV as well as film to maybe try and bring in more of an audience. And again, cost of living, it's why pay £5 a month for a magazine when there's the internet there. But then equally, with the internet, we've now got AI, and what's that going to do to online writing? So yeah, I think my focus at the moment is moderating and essays in physical releases, because whereas print magazines might be starting to ebb away, I think physical media is starting to come back into fashion, because everybody's realised that having 1,000 different streaming platforms is essentially just cable, but without the nice neat package. And it's, they, as we've seen, like Disney Plus routinely just culls a load of content that's not being watched, and then it's disappeared forever. Whereas if you've got that Blu-ray, that DVD, that VHS, that's not going anywhere unless you wear it out.
Yeah, I often wonder, like, where are all these films that get dumped on Netflix going? If Netflix suddenly goes under, then what, you just lost all the... I mean, maybe it's not a major tragedy, but it just seems odd if you're like a filmmaker and it's like, it's gone there, but what where is it? It's just living in a cloud somewhere, and it's nice to hold something in your hands, isn't it? Because we talk a lot about mental health on this podcast now, people navigate their own mental health. Is there anything kind of you gravitate to if you're feeling down or stressed, or feel like you need a bit of a pickup?
Well, something that I did, that I have done this year, is I was in a couple of like WhatsApp chats with some like fellow writers, and I found that just being involved in that was really battering my mental health, because they would be people who, for them, it was a side gig, the writing, like it used to be for me, and they would be moaning that they weren't getting any opportunities, but at the same time they were getting opportunities. And it would be like, well, I've written this thing for this place, why have they now got this other person to write about that? I could have written about that because I wrote about this other thing for them. And there was this constant comparing. So it said, well, they keep getting all this work, why am I not getting this work? And it was getting too much. So I kind of took a step back from that group. I mean, when I'm not watching films for work, I am watching films for pleasure. I think if you chopped me in half, the film would be through my core.
Do you get? It's interesting to hear that, because I've had a real, like, maybe it's just letterboxed, but I had a 2-year period of trying. I was like, I'm going to watch a film every day and log it every day, and something's happened in the last 6 months where I've just hit a sort of burnout with that app in particular. And I just wasn't even enjoying watching the films. It was just like, right, I need to watch something today to log it. And the watch list was up to like 3,000 films, and when I'm going to watch these on my deathbed, I'm going to watch these films. Just at a point where I was like, the weight of these films was like weighing down on me, and I needed to sort of step back from that. So it's good to hear that you're still flying the flag for, cineasts and just watching films all hours God sends.
Yeah, on a particularly like stressful thing, I have to kind of watch what I call, not really brain dead television, but it's kind of like TV that doesn't take too much from me. So Neighbours is my mental health program.
Is he back? Because I was like, and that stopped, but it's back, I guess.
It stopped, and I'm not going to lie, I had an existential breakdown because Neighbours has been like tea time food. Like I have my dinner and I'm watching Neighbours. So I was like, what am I gonna watch when I'm eating? Like, I don't know what's going to happen. But there was outcry, because it didn't stop because it wasn't popular. It stopped because Channel 5 didn't want to put any money into it anymore. So they
Right.
pulled out as financiers, and then they struggled to find somebody else. So yeah, it came off the air for about 6 months, and then Amazon stepped in to fund it, and now it's available on Freevee on Amazon. And
Right.
they did like a time jump of like 2 years to kind of fix over the time that they were away, and to then sort of restart the stories because they had ended it in such a way that it was pretty over. And then yeah, they brought it back, but at the same time as bringing it back, they put on like 1,000 classic episodes, and then from I think it's 2014 onwards, just the full years. So like
Wow.
240 episodes of each year, and I've been slowly working my way through them since last September, I think. So I've gone from 2014 and I'm just about to enter 2020. And it's just, I
Absolutely
mean, if you like,
superb.
yeah.
Love it.
And if you like horror, there's a great villain in Neighbours called Finn Kelly, who
Okay.
was he was a teacher that turned up as like the ex-partner of somebody else, and like he tormented her because he was jealous of her position in the school because they both worked at the school. And then it turned out that he had a brain tumor, and then he then he got attacked by them. Like he was doing something to them. He got pushed off a cliff, and then he woke up with no memories past the age of 19.
Right.
And then everybody became friends with him again, and then he slowly got his memories back and went like evil Finn again, and he took a load of them away to an island, and like he shot a beloved character and killed him with a crossbow. He chucked another one down a pit with a snake, and it's like
Oh my
this is
God.
the mindless kind of like entertainment that I need. Like this is just it's it's just fluff. But
Yeah.
yeah, Finn Kelly's he's a great little villain. And like Toady, Toady's a long established character. He left recently, and part of his exit story was there was like drama in the outback, and uh, a relatively new, not necessarily important character got eaten by a crocodile in the episode.
Really?
I was waiting all week. So it's like a week long thing, and they kept showing this crocodile, and I kept saying to my husband, "Someone best get eaten by that crocodile because I know someone's going to die, and someone best go in that crocodile." And they did, so it was fine.
Oh God. Right. You've really sold that now. You've really sold that. I'm gonna make a note as soon as I get home. We are going to talk about the X Files season 2, episode 13, Irresistible. Now, when I asked you to do this, Kat, you said that you were a massive fan. You had a shrine in your bedroom. You read all the
Yeah.
comics. You got anything to do with the X Files growing up. So it sounds like it meant a lot to you, did it?
I did, yeah. My mum watched it. I think she'd watched the first season, and then Sky Two, the channel Sky Two, because
Yeah.
I was either Sky One, and then they bought Sky Two. That opened with like a medley of episodes from seasons one and two,
Right.
and I remember she recorded them, and I watched those like 6 episodes, and was like, okay, I want to watch this program. So then they were repeating series one, so I watched that, and then as it progressed each week, my mum would record the episode, and then I would watch it the next day. And I remember the quite controversial episode Home
Yeah.
came with a disclaimer from her saying, "I don't think you want to watch this one." And I was like, "Give it me, it's the X Files. I need it." And then even before we got to the X Files music, I regretted my decision because Home did traumatize me for a number of years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had the diary, the glow in the dark clock,
Yes.
t-shirts, episode novelizations, spin-off novelizations, the comic books. My mum took the opportunity to start dyeing my hair because I think she wanted to dye her hair, but she didn't want to dye her hair. So the next best thing was to dye her daughter's hair.
Right.
So I was every shade of like auburn and red there was
I
because
love it.
it's like Scully.
Yeah.
It's like Scully. So yeah, when I was at the first couple of years at secondary school, people used to like tease me and call me Scully, but I didn't. I was very much into the X-Files, so it wasn't quite the slight that they thought it was.
I mean, the interesting thing about this particular episode is it's like it is written by Chris Carter, who usually plows out the alien ones, but it's very down to earth, and we get this opening which is set in a funeral home. There's a woman giving a eulogy about someone called Jennifer. Jennifer's there, open casket. The room's got red drapes. Quite Lynchian, actually, the room, red drapes. They've got Eric Satie playing piano in the background. We introduces this man. He appears to be one of the funeral workers working the funeral home, and he's told Jennifer's body, to go on a phrase, is going to be kept in the chapel overnight. And you can tell there's something off with this guy. He's kind of goes up to the casket, he starts stroking the dead body's face and tells her she's a beautiful girl. And then we kind of get this cut to the funeral home at night, and there's the other funeral worker there. He's feeling a bit creeped out. He sees something come out of the shadows that almost looks demon-like, and then we realise it's this guy, Donny, creepy Donny Faster. Funeral worker asks him what he's doing there, and turns out he's been cutting the hair off Jennifer's head, and it's strewn all over the floor. And then he gets sent out of the funeral parlour. I mean, there's nothing really supernatural about that opening, but it's really chilling, this episode, isn't it? But because of the absence of something supernatural in there. I mean, what did you think of it, rewatching it?
Yeah, well, I think it's the same with like Supernatural, which is kind of, I feel like, an X-Files legacy show in a way. It
Mm.
had a lot of the same creatives behind it and some of the same cast involved. In the scarier episodes are the ones that don't have anything supernatural in because it's digging into the depravity of mankind. You look at the news and you hear all sorts of horror stories, and that is far worse than any of the weirder X-Files episodes. Because I mean, like Home, touched upon before.
Yeah.
It's not a supernatural one. That's a family of an inbred community,
Mm.
and what they are doing. That it's that knowing that there is a nugget of truth somewhere within history about a similar group of people that makes it scary. And in this case, it is this guy that's got a death fetish, and the fact that it's talked about a lot during this episode means it's fairly, to a degree, common fetish that people have.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that there's a whole thing of like not kink shaming people, but I kind of feel that if it's a death fetish, then that's a step too far.
Mm.
And it's interesting to sort of see it be discussed, because it is quite disturbing, because he's not, at least initially, he's like taking hair and fingernails, and it just feels, well, it is an invasion of these women's bodies.
There's a kind of allusions through it to the real world as well. So Jeffrey Dahmer's not explicitly mentioned, but the detective, the special agent, I think his name's Box, does mention something that's been going off in Milwaukee, and that's a mention of Jeffrey Dahmer and his crimes. So we're kind of rooted in this sort of real world. But yeah, it's when the killer in this case crosses over into not just defiling graves and defiling women who've been buried, but going out and picking up sex workers. And I mean, it's quite a remarkable scene, actually, where he brings this woman back to his apartment and tries to get her to have a really cold bath, and then the whole bedroom's mocked up with flowers, like funeral flowers, and and then she's found later on. And of course, all the way through, you've got Scully going through her own issues. At this point, abducted by Dwayne Barry, the alien abductee, abducted by aliens, I think she's also been abducted in the episode Young at Heart, where she gets taken by some bank robbers. So that's like 3 times. And then at the end of this episode, she's then taken by the killer as well. So she's going through this whole, like, you know, just trauma, like post-traumatic stress. I mean, the first time I watched this episode, I didn't like the kind of shape-shifting face of the killer at the end, because it was like, well, they're trying to crowbar in something paranormal into this. But it totally worked the second time I watched it, because it's like every man she looks at is a potential threat to her. And if she would have gone through all these different scenarios, you know, it's bound to have taken a toll on her.
Yeah, I mean, she'd also been stalked by Eugene Toombs.
Yes.
You see, he tries to get her in Squeeze, and then it's kind of her that he's coming after again when he comes back. So she kind of has, he always, you know, is this pull for, you know, the monsters of the week. So yeah, she's been through the ringer. And yeah, because obviously the other time when we see this guy in demon form is in the opening scene, and then, you know, they goes, "Oh no, it's you." And I think it is, in his case, it's that playing on the fear of the dark. So again, it could be him projecting his own things onto her. I always enjoyed it when Mulder was having a little bit more fun. And I mean, this one opens it. The reason that they're there is because the special agent that's like asked them there thinks it's aliens. Like, there's another believer.
Yeah, he was great, wasn't he? Like, Special Agent Mo Box, and he's like, "Oh yeah, well, you need to check out the Mutual UFO Network." Or something. It's like, I was a UFO fan.
Yeah, and that's obviously why he's bought Mulder. But then it's quite nice to see the switch of. I mean, one, Mulder's only taken it because he wants to go to the sports game, which happens to be in town. But also it's seeing Mulder not being his normal spooky Mulder. It's the Mulder that you would understand why the FBI wanted him to work for them.
Right.
You know, he does a really good job at profiling who this man is, and, you know, say he predicts that at the minute it's dead women, but that's not going to sustain him for long, and we need to do this, that, and the other. So it's quite nice to sort of see him get to kind of prove his worth of why he's in the FBI, because I think when you watch sort of the pilot and things, you're just like, well, why would the FBI let this like UFO loon in? And it's through episodes like Irreversible, through episodes like Irresistible and like A Field Where They Died, which comes along later, that actually shows why the FBI would want him.
Yeah, because he's I think he does quite a bit of detective work in Young at Heart as well, and you go, oh, it's actually nice to see him putting some clues together and actually doing his job. So you're totally right, because a lot of time he will waltz into a scene and he'll already have a theory about what it's going to be when he gets there, or he's got some theory and then the episode kind of works its way around and takes you on a red herring. So yeah, I totally like that, and I like that this. I've not seen any of Millennium, but from what I've read, Chris Carter was saying that this episode is a kind of template for that show, and having a character almost like a Will Graham character who can see inside the minds of criminals and inside of killers. So that was really nice. But yeah, it was funny. It was interesting watching it and trying to put myself in the place of an X-Files fan watching it at the time. And also it's a dark, quite rightly, episode, but the one bit that really stood out to me was like when Mulder at the end describes Scully as a pretty woman, and I could just imagine a lot of shippers back at the time going, he said it, he's finally said it. You know, he said it, he said what we knew all along. So that really sort of stood out for me. But I like that you got to see a bit more of this kind of tenderness between them, and because they're in when they go to the jail, they're very close together, Mulder and Scully, very hushed tones speaking to each other, and it's very sort of tender scene, and you can see how much they sort of they kind of care about each other. And then later on, Mulder makes a joke about, he says something like, stood over a grave, and he starts talking about, he says something like dippity-doo and hairdryer. Do you remember that line?
Yeah, vaguely.
It's something like really off-colour, like reference to necrophilia that I think was maybe kind of something that got missed from the initial script that Carter put forward, and the studio bosses were like, we can't talk about necrophilia on network TV. Are you mad? What are you doing?
According to the trivia, this episode is the first time that Mulder and Scully embrace since the pilot.
Right.
So again, that's something for the shippers to get into because they're getting closer. They're embracing. So there's that. This is one that's directed by David Nutter, who
Yes. Right.
is whenever his name comes up attached to sort of like any TV show, it's likely going to be an interesting one. It's a shame the same couldn't be said about Disturbing Behaviour, which I love, but it suffered heavily from a lot of studio interference and editing, and the film that was released wasn't necessarily his. So whenever I can support him elsewhere, I always take that opportunity.
Do you know I've not seen that, and I'm going to make a note because loving David Nutter.
Yeah, I mean, Disturbing Behaviour feels like it very much could have been a missing episode of the X-Files. Mark Snow does the score for it.
Right.
It's obviously it's filmed in Vancouver. It's got David Nutter. I mean, the cast is because it's like a teen sci-fi thing where a new kid moves to this small like island town where there's this group of teenagers who are perfect called the Blue Ribbons, and then there's another like the slacker stoner teen who's got this theory that the Blue Ribbons are being like manipulated by the grown-ups around them and maybe doing some brainwashy type things with them. So there's this conspiracy theory and that. But the cast has got a young Katie Holmes, a young Nick Stahl, a young James Marsden,
Right.
a young Catherine Isabel. It's got William Sadler in it as like the school janitor that's kind of aware of what's happening and is doing his best to try and keep the kids safe. So yeah, it was a case of I think it got made and the studio was just like it's good but it needs to be like 80 minutes and not 100 minutes. So
Right.
they had to chop a big chunk out of it. So it doesn't, I think to some people they are missing that. But I mean, I watched it when I was a teenager who was into the X-Files and it had a lot of X-Files vibes. Plus it had like, a handsome James Marsden in it.
Yeah. Well, what more do you need? That's going down. Has this sparked off an interest in going back to watch more of the X-Files, or are you halfway through a rewatch?
Well, my husband has never actually watched all of the X-Files. We
Right.
did try a while ago to like get him through it and we got into series 2, but then we got busy. So at some point in the future we will
Yeah.
have to finish that off because it was such a big part of my teenage years. It's weird that he can't do that, but I have been fortunate in the last couple of years to get to do some writing on some X-Files episodes. So I wrote about when Doggett came in and took over from Mulder
Yeah.
and how he was, perceived by everybody. And I also wrote about Home in the hopes that having to watch it and scrutinize it and analyze it, it would take that fear away. But all that ended up happening was I was having some really disturbing dreams for the duration of writing that article. So, and yeah, I think it's probably more like cherry picking episodes. Like there's certain episodes I like to revisit, like Firewalker and Ice, the sort of ones that are
Yeah.
like quite contained and feel very much like mini movies. But yeah, at some point I'll get around to that rewatch.
What are you up to for the rest of the week? Kat, you busy?
Fear 2000, which is like an academic conference where a lot of writers, myself included, have prepared presentations on different things to do with A Nightmare on Elm Street because this
Right.
year A Nightmare on Elm Street's turned 40. So instead of doing a more general theme, the theme for this year's papers has been A Nightmare on Elm Street. So I am going to be turning up sort of on the second day to talk about how It Follows is kind of a Nightmare on Elm Street legacy sequel that people have been wanting but there's just a lot of similarities between those two texts, and I'm kind of arguing that we all want a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel or remake or whatever, but technically we kind of already have it in this very different world, which shares a lot of the same DNA.
Believe Me is written and edited by me, Chris Boyd, with production support from Steve Marshall. The music is by Johnny Boyle, and our logo is by Russ Brown. If you like the show, please do hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you out there next time.